Good morning, everybody. To all of you in the packed marquee, but also to those of you watching the live stream on the YouTube channel, ThinkTent 2025. Welcome. My name's Mark Littlewood. I'm the director of PopCon, or Popular Conservatism. There's leaflets on your chairs about us. If you don't know much about us, you'll learn a lot about us in the next hour. But just a small plea to, if you're not part of our newsletter group or Conservative WhatsApp group, there are these QR codes. I have no idea how they work. I'm a pen and paper person, but if you do, you can scan these QR codes and join our WhatsApp group and newsletter list. I'm delighted to be joined by my good friend and I think Britain's leading Conservative public intellectual, Dr David Starkey. Let me just tell you how things are going to go. I'm going to fire a few questions at David to tease out some of his thinking about how we use conservatism to save Britain. That will take about half an hour. Then I'll come over to you guys for questions for about half an hour. So let them percolate in your mind a little. And looking around the room, I can see a good number of faces who would have seen the Starkey-Littlewood double act before. So we're going to play a few of your favourite old tunes, but we're also going to trial a little bit of our second album. All right. So we'll see how.
This is experimental.
So we'll see how that goes down. Look, David, let's start, because we set up Popular Conservatism to sort of analyse why 14 years of Tory government had been so disappointing. That was the essay question. And then basically on the eve of our launch, I think you answered it for me with what's now become widely known as the Starkey thesis. What is the Starkey thesis? Give us a potted introduction to what's gone wrong and how we fix it.
I think broadly we've got to understand that we are in a most terrible mess, which is why we're all feeling, even despite the pleasures of last night, and maybe because of the pleasures of last night, a little bit washed out. But there's also hope, because we have been here before, exactly in the same place 50 years ago. We're celebrating the 100 years from the birth of Margaret Thatcher. We're celebrating 50 years from her becoming Conservative Party leader. And we're celebrating 52 years since what I suppose, if I really am in the position that you kindly said I was, is my predecessor, Keith Joseph, his analysis of what had gone wrong with conservatism since 1951. And you will remember he put it in 2 sentences. He could be a very good writer. He could also be a terrible writer, but they're 2 very good sentences. I thought I was a conservative, but I wasn't. I'd been a member of a Conservative government that had done absolutely nothing conservative. Now, we can rewrite those words now about ourselves. That is to say, the Starkey thesis is that from the beginning, conservatism has had a problem. We are in, as Disraeli, the greatest leader of the Conservative Party, though not the greatest Conservative Prime Minister, the man who really formulates conservatism, says, we are in a progressive country. That means it's a country that changes. Conservatives don't like change. How do we deal with this? It's a paradox. Conservatism is a paradox from the very beginning. And conservatism, the word itself, is coined and it's born in the wake of a great defeat, the First Reform Act, which kills the Tory party. The Tory party is killed in 1832, and you invent this new thing called conservatism. And you may remember, going back to Margaret Thatcher, going back to her intellectual inspirations, Thatcher marches into the Conservative Research Department, staffed then, maybe as now, by rampant wets and a profound nest of hornets, and is alleged to fish out of her handbag, which must have been very big, bearing in mind the size of the book, Hayek's Constitution of Liberty, slams it on the table and says, this is what we believe. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that the last chapter by Hayek says, why I am not a conservative. Right, so what's the problem?
Yes, so that we need the rebirth, but what's the problem? How did we get caught in the same problem we got caught in the 50s,
because
60s and 70s?
conservatism perpetually compromises with what has gone before. We get what we conserve wrong. So in 1951, Churchill knew we should have reversed the NHS. He knew we should have reversed not simply the creeping, the galloping socialisation. Remember, Britain has never recovered from the Attlee government. Attlee was a brilliant administrator doing terrible things, like building a completely unfunded welfare state on a ruined, bankrupt wartime economy. It was an absurd thing to do. But Churchill went along with it. From 1951 to 1979, we had a coalition government. They even had the same idea of a uniparty, except it was called Butskillism. So you had Gateskill on the one hand, Winchester, and Butler, Rab Butler, was he? I think he was Eton. One Conservative, the other Labour, indistinguishable policies. Prices and incomes policies, Keynesian economics, 5-year plans, targets, the whole lot, until Keith Joseph, Thatcher come along and say, break. And you have then, which is equally an extraordinarily effective instrument, you say, right, we will reverse Keynesian economics at terrible cost. Remember, the costs are dreadful of bringing inflation, which goes to 23, 24% under control. Interest rates go 18, is it finally? Something, and people say, this current generation has had it uniquely bad, but there we are. We'll not go down that rabbit hole. So you reverse it, but at one cost. We're here in Lancashire. My family comes from Lancashire. My father was a tool maker as well. I think you can see from the result he was a better one. And of course, he was rendered unemployed for 4 years by the death of King Cotton. And Thatcher completed the destruction of those traditional industries. So that was part of the price. The other was we lost sight that conservatism is not just free market economics. Free market economics, or some version of them, is central to conservatism, but it's not all. Because, of course, when we get the successor regime, in other words, our equivalent, what we're fighting against, what is the equivalent of the Attlee government, is the Blair government. What we need to understand is that the Blair government wrought much more fundamental change than the Attlee government. That the Blair government was, in fact, a slow burn French Revolution. When you get the 1832 Reform Act and the response to that with Robert Peel and Disraeli, in the background, of course, is the French Revolution itself and the original conservative thinker who is Edmund Burke. And Burke recognizes that what the French Revolution had done was to tear the world up by the roots and then be astonished that it withered and died.
This is fascinating, but with Blair, and we've had this discussion before, I can remember him winning in 1997 and being quite relaxed about it because he was going to inherit Thatcherism.
We were very different. I spent election night with my head down the lavatory. Admittedly, it was vintage champagne, but it was, I had a feeling, I didn't know what it was, that something awful was going to happen.
But it took you and others a long while to spot it.
2 decades to work out what had gone wrong.
So what is it? Obviously, it's a national sport now to rail against Blair and boo and hiss him. But what did the Blair administration do that we need to now undo?
Right. We need then to identify what conservatives should properly be about. What are we trying to conserve? We are the heirs of what used to be the most successful country ever. We've got to get this into our heads. We invent modernity. Britain actually invents modernity. We invented modernity fundamentally. Now, this is, if you remember, our first discussion was about what's the relative weight between economics and politics. And I think we've made the terrible error going along with Clinton and his advisors. It's the economy, stupid. It's not. The economy is downstream from politics and society. The reason you have an industrial revolution here, which is the foundation of that modernity, is our politics. And it's the politics of freedom, that central conservative concept, but limited freedom. Freedom that's limited by a responsible society. Freedom that's limited by notions of tradition, of boundaries, of family, of nation, of country, of little institutions, the little platoons that are such a strong feature of Edmund Burke. And what we should be doing as Conservatives is conserving that idea. The Constitution sounds dead, boring, tedious. It's not. It is the equivalent of, we were talking about Angela feeling a bit unwell, and we sort of say, oh, she's got a bit of constitutional problem. Something's going wrong. And the Constitution is the thing that holds a country together. It's that central thread that Burke talks about, the thing that links past, present, and future. It's the kind of essence of the history, the political self-consciousness of a people that holds them together, enables them to govern themselves now, preserves the memory, enables them to govern themselves now and to shape the future. Blair despised all of that. The central principle of our history, the thing we invent long before democracy, is the idea of responsible self-government through Parliament. Parliament whose laws bind us all because we're all there, in person or by our representatives. And that's been the foundation of Britain's greatness. And Blair and the left hate this idea because fundamentally they distrust you. They treat you with contempt. They think you are stupid. They think you are old-fashioned. They think you are nationalist. They think correctly that you don't embrace their brave, silly, shallow new world. And all of this is pioneered in Germany in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War with the distrust of what we call democracy, because of course it was argued wrongly, in fact, that democracy had directly led to Hitler's accession to power. So you have this idea that we can't have our traditional notion of democracy, parliamentary sovereignty, which is sovereign not because it makes Dominic Grieve feel self-important, as you know, this used to be, or indeed John Bercow, even more self-important, but because it represents you and me and all of us collectively. That's what parliamentary sovereignty means, and they were determined to do away with it, and they do away with it by creating a kind of super state on top of the old state. Power goes in two directions. The Taxpayers Alliance has been brilliant at exposing, remind me, what's the current number of quangos?
Well, they say it's 438, I say it's 444. Because
but remember, you've forgotten Labour abolished 7 of them. The the NHS quango itself, the super quango. But do you know how many quangos were dealing with the regulation of healthcare? 6 separate quangos. 6 bodies with executives on 100, 200,000 a year, complete staffs and whatever, all falling over each other. Anyway, the problem is this. Virtually every important decision is now taken by a single issue expert body. Now, this sounds like a good idea. Any of you who knows anything about political thought will know this is what Plato said government should be. Government by a philosopher. Aristotle says no. The person who judges the meal isn't the cook, it's the eater. It's you and me, and that's the central thing. But let me just give you an illustration of why it's gone so badly wrong. I mean, we now know, for example, that the Bank of England, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England has been disastrous at managing the public finances. We know that the subcommittee of it that's responsible for the sale of the national debt has done idiocies. We are the only country that has large parts of the national debt index linked, sold at a time of virtually zero inflation and zero interest rate. Deranged, completely deranged. Anyway, but I've got a good example. We all lived under a genuine platonic single-issue expert regime, and it was called COVID. And the committee was even called SAGE, you know, but platonic wise men. And look at the fuck up they made. I am, ladies and gentlemen, of course, using technical language as an approved academic. But you look at this is what happens when you just address one issue. Nobody must die of COVID. It doesn't matter if you die of a heart attack. Indeed, it's positively encouraged because we shut down the whole of the NHS and turn it into a national COVID service. It doesn't matter if you destroy the educational opportunities of 3 generations of schoolchildren, or if you bankrupt the nation by incurring the costs of a middle-rank war. It's insane. And then the other thing you do is, even more dangerously, you shift power to lawyers. law in Britain is traditionally under Parliament, which was expressed brilliantly by the fact that the upper house of Parliament was presided over by the Lord Chancellor, the head of the legal system, and also that the supreme branch of appeal was the Judicial Committee of the House of Lords. Blair and his cohorts, all lawyers, all with wives who were lawyers, decided that wasn't enough. And in that wonderful phrase of Coney Barrett, the American Supreme Court Justice, addressing the DEI appointment on the Supreme Court and pointing out she wished to replace an imperial presidency with an imperial judiciary. And what Blair gave us was an imperial judiciary. And it's expressed above all through something that sounds cuddly. And we've got to fight. I was at the, gay as I am, and indeed one of those who back in the early 90s led the equalization of consent for gay and straight people, a wonderful gay event. Except all those sweet lads, as well as telling wonderfully dirty jokes, and their repertoire of dirty jokes was even more imaginative than mine. Some things advance, they really do. But they all kept chattering about gay rights, at the same time that our leader is about to revoke the European Convention on Human Rights. We've got to learn a new language. The language of human rights sounds good, is a disaster. Because what it does, I call it Paddington Bear. Think about it. It's got a little squidgy red pork pie on its head. It's got a sweet little luggage label saying, "Woo." You've already got tears coming to your eyes, and it's got a little battered suitcase, and it's looking lonely, and you feel so sorry for it, and you know it's an immigrant, and you know the odd murder or two apart, it's just like you. We've got to grow up. We've got to realize any notion that law has its source outside the nation means we can't control it. It means there's a thing called a universal human being. It means that these people tumbling from war zones, having killed, tortured, done monstrous things, are really just like you and me. They're not. It means that there shouldn't be nations. The Green Party actually says this, that there should be no barriers, that there should be no difference between a citizen and an immigrant. But you know what's the truly terrible thing? All of that is now written into our law. And it's been written into our law without any consent or debate in Parliament, by internal legal process led by the man who is the intellectual godfather of all of this, Tom Bingham, the Lord of Repeal. And in his book on the rule of law, Bingham completely stands the relationship between Parliament and the law courts on their head. He effectively turns the rule of law into the rule of lawyers. It's done without any form of consultation, but it's now legal gospel. And the thing that really, Mark, it's scarcely believable. He actually glosses that book in a lecture which he wisely gives as far away as possible from Britain in Australia, though with modern communication it all leaked back. He says, listen to me, and we'll stop now and we'll shift gear. He says, listen very carefully. I am quoting precisely. Human rights law is intrinsically anti-democratic. It is counter-majoritarian, and it protects the minority at the expense of the majority. And then he goes on and he lists the minorities that it protects, headed by the mentally sick. Do you wonder why Rudakabana and Kalokani were free to murder? That's why. And it's not an accident. It's not just due to idiotic judges. It is actually part of the law, which means our enterprise has got to be exactly what Thatcher did with the entire nationalised structure, the entire structure of Keynesian economics, of Prices and Incomes Board, nationalised industries, council houses, blow it up. Exactly what Burke says you have to do with the French Revolution. You have to get rid of these absurdist structures. Remember, they wanted to make everything 10. We think about the metric system. They wanted 10 hours in the day, 10 days in the week, 10 months in the year. Demented. Everywhere had to be the same.
So this is
in other words, what we've got to do, the first thing of the Starkey thesis, the first word that appears in our title is repeal, or revoke, or indeed annul. The whole of that structure, before we can do anything, has got to go. And the reason why government doesn't work is that structure. And you can see it brilliantly, because even with the vast majority that he's got, Keir Starmer, who is a product of this structure, who believes in this structure, still can't make it work.
So this is the challenge then, isn't it? We've essentially seen a flow of power, incremental but dramatic over many years, away from Parliament and to these quangos, these quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisations on the one hand, and to the law courts in the other. So our immigration policy seems to be now set by judges rather than the immigration minister, for example. Our climate change policy set more by the Climate Change Committee.
Wages are. I mean,
wages set by judges.
The staggering bankruptcy of Birmingham is entirely due to the Equality Act. The Equality Act, a British Act of Parliament, has the Marxist labour theory of value written into it in 3 bizarre equations. Judges set wages. They don't only set wages, they set our entire extractive industry policy.
Yep.
You can't drill in the North Sea or frack because it's illegal. I mean, this is deranged. This is actually worse than the Prices and Incomes Board, which at least included a few people who knew about wages. I mean, judges don't know about anything, by definition. I mean, I'm being really serious. The idea that a lawyer should take a substantive decision on public policy is deranged. That's not their job. Their job is to weigh the competing claims of individuals and institutions under the law. It's not to determine questions of public policy. And again, we haven't talked about this. We as a party are at least as guilty as Labour in enabling this. Theresa May, cursed be upon her name. I would seriously, if I led the Tory party, the first thing I would do would be to withdraw the whip from her. And we need to recognise the degree of catastrophe that the Climate Change Act inflicted on us. Under Cameron, do you know we are responsible for non-crime hate incidents? This most fundamental undermining of the concepts of free speech and freedom is a Tory responsibility. It is a matter of absolute shame.
So we need the plan is this, isn't it? Somehow we need to hoover up all the powers that were given away and return them to the sovereign parliament.
That's
to
correct.
Actually say this now, the buck stops with you, our elected MPs.
Yeah.
If we
no. The buck stops with you.
Well, because you control the MPs.
No, it stops with the electorate. And this is the enormous challenge. We've a vast task of education, because we've had a politics, I'm afraid, thanks to your degree, in which has just become manipulative.
He blames everything on PPE from Balliol College, Oxford. Yeah.
Well, bearing in mind the number of our prime ministers who've been trained.
True.
That is assuming education has any effect at all, which I occasionally, as a former university teacher, I occasionally wonder about. But that's an entirely different matter. But what we've also got to do, and this is where, ladies and gentlemen, I think the novelty, my trying out, we've got to offer the positive. Why does this matter? Why might it work? We've got to talk about things that we've completely forgotten to talk about. We've got to say that putting the nation first is the right thing to do. Because Disraeli says very clearly the Conservative Party is a national party or it's nothing. We are the party of the nation state. There's been this absurd view that to say you put your own nation first, it's disgraceful, We should be thinking about the world. I mean, you have people like Gus O'Donnell, for God's sake, who is still desperately influential in government, saying he thought his responsibility wasn't simply he's head of the Treasury, isn't simply the welfare of Britain, but the welfare of the bloody world. We could do nothing about these things. We need to recognise. Look, you can have a global responsibility if you are, as we were in the 19th century, when we advanced things like free trade, if you are the global hegemon. you can take responsibility for abolishing slavery if, as we had then, you have the most powerful instrument in the world, the Royal Navy. We have none of those things. We have to do what every sensible country does, apart from a handful, mainly of the Western powers. We've to realize you begin by looking after yourself. You'll remember the debate between J.D. Vance and the late Pope on the Augustinian notion of that you begin not by loving the world, not by loving your neighbor, but by loving yourself and your family. And it fans out from there. And we've got to start to do that. And that will force a radical division of how we conduct government, how we conduct foreign policy, of our attitude to international bodies, of our rejection of the nonsenses of international law, of the shame of the Chagos Islands deal, the sheer insanity, and the fact that it's defended. And that you have people, I mean, again, I'm going to use very strong language. Hermer is a servant of the crown. He is sworn to the crown, and yet he has done every single thing that he could to undermine the national interest. There used to be a word for this, and it begins with T. And it's a very ugly word, which had a very ugly death, and there was a reason for it. And I never thought it would be necessary to revive this kind of language in politics. But when you get, as we had once upon a time, groups that actively conspire against the nation holding power within it, then I'm afraid...
Yeah, this is where we get to. So I've got two more questions to you before I come over to the audience for questions. I think we've got Chris on one microphone and we've got another, but so get your questions ready. The first is this, David. We've been, you and I, both together and separately, going around the country talking about these concepts. Evangelising about these
the
concepts.
key word.
And it seems we've made quite a lot of progress. Do you think these ideas that we need to restore democracy, take on the quangocracy, put the judiciary back into the box it belongs to, reassert parliamentary sovereignty, do you think the parties of the right of centre in Britain have got that? What's been their intellectual progress and development vis-à-vis the Starkey thesis since you started proselytising it? How much progress has been made in either the Conservative Party or the Reform Party? How much more needs to be done?
I think there's been a lot of, I mean, above all, this funny thing called the Overton window, which I see now as a piece of plate glass that's been firmly kicked in, So there's a very large gap, but it's got lots of sharp edges, and you have to be careful when you step through it. The Overton window's enormously transformed. Look at the Daily Mail headline today, or was it yesterday, questioning the number of people of colour in advertisements and the completely total disjunction of 4% of the population, and is it 64% of advertisements? That would have been totally unsayable. This is a very good thing, and we're seeing shifts in all sorts of directions. We're also seeing, it has to be said, I'm afraid, on the Reform side rather than our side, the Reform Party machine formally buying into this idea. Formally buying in to, if you like to call it, the Starkey thesis, that there is even a think tank that is doing the necessary work in drafting legislation. Now, on the other hand, the thing that is striking is Farage has never brought any of this together. In other words, Reform have been looking at, they announced very early the repeal of the ECHR, the aggressive anti-immigration policy and so on, but they've never explained the big idea. As we see with Kemi, she's had a very small Damascene conversion, a kind of little pipette of Damascene conversion on the ECHR, and happily said that nobody can be a candidate who supports remaining within it. But there's been no attempt at presenting the idea overall, and above all, there's been no attempt at what I tried to do just now, to explain why it's so necessary. Of course, there's another aspect which I think I ought to fill in at this point, why it's peculiarly necessary for us as Conservatives. Now, Kemi again came very near. She said the reason that the Labour Party has gone so wrong so quickly is because it's following its principles. She said, the reason that we went wrong less quickly was because we didn't follow ours. But that's not quite right. The reason we went wrong is because we followed Labour. We did exactly what the Labour Party had done. So unless we formally break with the Cameroon idea of heir to Blair, but you can see how it comes about. If you're Conservative and you've been handed a settlement like Blair, well, do you conserve it or don't you? And it took the wisdom and the courage of a Margaret Thatcher to realise you couldn't. It will take the wisdom and courage of, yet we don't know who, to realise you've got to do the same thing with Blair. So there's been a broad general recognition. What's important is the words, the idea of the repeal and the restoration, they're getting into the public's mind. They're becoming part of the vocabulary. That's a crucial step, because this is the first time, sorry, I'm being very self-complimentary, this is the first time ideas from the right have really begun to come up. The left captured language. Mm-hmm. That's why we're in the mess that we are. We've to capture it back.
And the last question I wanted to ask you before I come over to the audience, David, was that's your view of where, if you like, the political leadership on the right is. Looking at the wider public, now you're a public intellectual, you're not running an advertising agency or a Saatchi and Saatchi style campaign. But how do you think these ideas can be communicated to the public? You know, you speak to a member of the public who's not particularly politically engaged. Just take the absolutely median voter who will say, who will give you a whole stream of, if you like, retail complaints. I can't get a GP appointment. My wages haven't gone up. I can't build an extension in my back garden. There's too many potholes on the road. Politicians seem to lie all the time. There's a general sense of disillusionment.
Malaise.
Malaise or disillusionment. But, you know, never have I knocked on a door and heard from a voter, you know, well, are you going to repeal the Equality Act or the Human Rights Act first? Because my vote will depend on
Yeah, I have strong feelings on the separation of power.
It
keeps me awake at night, and my abyss hairs, you know.
So how do we mainline that challenge? You said right at the start of your remarks, David, that it sounds like this nebulous, rather abstract, theoretical, academic analysis of the history of governance in Britain. How do you actually get the electorate to buy into that sort of approach, rather than saying, what the hell are these theorists going on about, when all I want is the potholes filled in and a faster GP appointment?
I think you do it by actually listening to what they say, something that politicians have stopped doing. The great theme that I hear, I think there's a profound atmosphere of national sadness as well as anger. I think there's a sense of loss. That phrase, the best phrase seems to me, when people talk about wanting their country back, you could dismiss it as mere nostalgia. I don't. I think people know something has been taken away from them. And what I've been describing, that state that Blair created, was a deliberate taking away. And also it was something even more damning. Blair told us he was going to give us, he wanted a new country. He created one. But he did something totally remarkable. There is, of course, the famous remark back in East Germany of Bertolt Brecht when there'd been a rising in the 1950s against the East German government, and the East German government expresses profound disappointment with the population, that they hadn't appreciated the wonders of starving under communism. And Bertolt Brecht comes up with this marvelous parody. He doesn't dare publish it, but he comes up with this marvelous parody. In these circumstances, wouldn't it be appropriate for the government to say that as the people has failed, it will dissolve the people and elect a new one? Blair did. Yeah. That's what mass immigration was about. In other words, you not only aspire to change the government of the nation, you begin to change the nation, how it defines itself, what it is, without consent. Everybody knows this. In other words, there is a complete connective thread in everything we've been talking about, providing we get the language right, providing we are responsive and open to these concerns.
So someone somewhere is going to have to come up with the appropriate slogan. I found it quite interesting, an argument put to me that the proof that Donald Trump is a conservative broadly can be found in the most important single word in his slogan. It's not "Make America Great," it's "Make America Great Again."
Again.
It's a reversion
It's exactly
to
the
something
same
that America felt that
Exactly
they
the
had
same
lost. It's not building something new, it's a reversion to something that
restoration.
used to work.
You see, this again is there's a lot of chatter about revolution in the air. I don't believe that. We were not a revolutionary people. When we had a revolution, and it was a very real one in the 17th century, we thought better of it. We undid it. It's unique without foreign intervention. And the whole of our political history is two steps forward, one step back. Even Magna Carta. Magna Carta begins as a radical, dangerous, quasi-republican document that would have taken us down the path of Poland. The following year, a good conservative statesman, the first Earl of Pembroke, comes along and he decides, this is not a very good idea. So he reenacts in the name of the young king all the good clauses and he cuts out all the bad ones, but he doesn't completely cut them out. He sets up a committee which then sort of meditates on these things for the next 10 years, and everybody forgets about them. And it is the most English of solutions.
Of undoing something.
In 1216. But unfortunately, we just treat sorry, the historian comes out, you must excuse me, but it treats the 1215 Magna Carta as the important one. It's not, it's the 1216.
Very interesting. So over to you for questions. So stick your hand high in the air. Sam's got a microphone. Chris has got a microphone. I'm going to take three at once. I'll start on this side. For those of you who've been at events I've checked before, you'll know the rules. A, please introduce yourself. B, make a comment or a question, or you can even give a speech as long as it is no more than one sentence in length and ends in a question mark, right? Those are.
And he will cut you off otherwise, yes.
And I'll start with Richard and Ian here. Again, if you can introduce yourselves. I know who many of you are.
Richard Patient, should the slogan be Take Back Control again? And do we need a separate organisation, separate from the parties, to sell this?
Interesting. Ian?
Ian Bocking, Gosport. Saving British democracy. Does it matter what label we put on it, providing we get the policies right? Does it matter who does it?
Does it matter? Do you mean by which party does it? Or?
Party or what label or anything?
Right. And then the lady here on the front row.
You were saying about history?
Can you introduce yourself, please,
Sorry,
ma'am?
you were saying about history?
Can you introduce yourself? Broken rule number one.
My name's Louise Rhodes. I read English at university, and I'm aware that universities nowadays have a very substantial left-wing, woke sort of element, and yet they are the people who've been trained to think about our needs, our democracy, our ideas. How do we get them thinking again?
Okay, a few to conjure with. Richard asks...
Take them one at a time.
Yeah, what Richard asks about is Take Back Control really the slogan, or some spin on that works so well and did seem to chime with the electorate when it came to the Leave vote.
I mean,
and again, the word back was important.
Take back.
A reversion.
In other words, take back control. Brexit. What we've got to understand is Brexit was a kind of rehearsal of everything we're talking about now. The European Union was a kind of bogeyman. The real things that we wanted back, as we've now discovered, are here at home. But again, the entire conspiracy of the deep state, it's a problem, You find yourself sounding like somebody loony online. But these things are true. So I feel very strongly that is exactly the point. But we will also have to address what went wrong with the Brexit campaign. But this is Brexit. Right, if you look, right, let me...
The Brexit campaign was fine. It was what came afterwards, wasn't it?
Just one second, I've had an idea. I think the exact comparison you've mentioned is Trump. Brexit was Trump 1, was the first Trump government. In other words, it was this idea that we fell into without having done the strategy or the strategic thinking.
You didn't know what comes next.
And we didn't know what came next, and we didn't know how to do it. And what we've got to do now, the repeal and restoration has got to be Trump 2. It's got to be the equivalent of what you saw, that extraordinary beginning. I mean, what's going on now, we mustn't be doing what Farage is doing and playing little me with America. That looks pathetic and silly. But what we can do, we can use it as we can draw ideas from it. And that extraordinary moment when Trump is sworn in very deliberately, very quickly, without the usual ceremony, I'm sure that's quite deliberate, in the rotunda of the Capitol, and then straight into the Oval Office, and behind him there's this kind of Thomas Cromwell figure. There's Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief Executive, Deputy Chief of Staff, and there's this vast pile of executive orders, and he starts signing, and things start happening. They start happening because you've done the work. We did not do the work on Brexit. We fell into Brexit because of, obviously, the whole calling of the referendum and whatever. But we are now forewarned. We cannot get it wrong a second time.
This is really interesting because you could also imagine, whether it's Reform or Conservatives or some coalition between them, this happening at the next election, that there's such an upswell of hatred against the Labour Party and disappointment about the state of the country, that a right-of-centre government swept by power and then starts scurrying around.
It starts behaving exactly as Keir Starmer did. See, the point was, Starmer thought he understood the machine because he was the machine, which is why you appoint Sue Gray. Sue Gray, I don't know whether people know this, Sue Gray had never advised on a single policy question at all. Has anybody read Oliver Letwin's memoirs?
I have, yeah.
Oh dear, what a political death, but there we are. Letwin's memoirs make clear that Sue Gray ran a reign of terror in Downing Street. She creates this bizarre thing, which we now need to recognise is the English Stasi. It is propriety and ethics. This extraordinary thing in Downing Street that does act as a Stasi. I know, I was on the receiving end of it. It keeps records of everybody in public office, everybody who holds an honour, every single observation you make on Twitter. It is completely extraordinary, and it's enforcing the new moral code of the left. And she did that, and that was who we thought he could govern.
Yep.
And of course, it's an absurdity.
Ian asked about saving British democracy. Does it much matter who does it?
I think it does. I'm a passionate believer in the importance of institutions. I think the Conservative Party is one of the great British institutions. Tim Stanley's lovely, silly column in saying that both the Church of England, despite the fact that did you know there's an actually Latin name for a female bishop? It's Episcopissa. And so I can think of no better description of the current primate of the Church of England, who is a former chief nursing officer than, Archiepiscopissa. Anyway, despite that absurd fact, it's worth saving, and I speak as an atheist, but I'm a very high church atheist, and I believe in the importance of ceremony. And the Church of England used to be English Shinto. It was the English worshipping themselves through the King Emperor, and it's always seemed to me to be entirely rational. I'm in favour of reviving it. But the question about reform, I think, you see, what I'm trying to do, I am, again, you probably gathered, in intellectual terms, I'm a total whore, except I don't charge, which means I'm presumably a very bad one. But I'm prepared to advise anybody. So I've been feeding ideas into reform. I'm very fond of Rupert Lowe. I do stuff with them. I advise the Conservative Party insofar as it will be advised. And what I'm hoping is that we will unite the right, not from the top, but from policy up. And this, if we can build a broad agreement on this big general idea, then I think we might get somewhere.
And picking up on your last answer, David, Louise asked about left-wing thinking at universities. Are you you're a one-man stand against this whole sort of woke intellectual establishment? Yeah. What do we do about that? How do we subvert that do we just need to accept we're David against Goliath?
You and I will now have a private conversation, and everybody else will promise not to listen in now. That's a deal, right? You know as well as I do that academics and scholars, and I'm going back, I'm an expert in the Renaissance period, we're the most venal collection of people in the world. Dangle a grant in front of people, and we will jump through a hoop like a performing bear. So all you need to do is to change the grant structure of the universities. The thing that's enforced this stuff are the research councils. Is the fact that we, again, you see, this is where, and I've got friends here from the New Culture Forum and whatever, you can't tackle culture straight on. You can't compete simply with the ideas, these mad ideas. Because remember, the mad ideas, when you've only got to, when you look at something like transgenderism, it's self-evidently deranged. You can't. It's self-evidently deranged. A man who thinks he's a woman should be in a mental hospital. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It really. I mean, the fact I was at an organisation last night that said, LGBT with T at the end in a conservative gathering, that we had Maria Miller, Penny Mordaunt, advancing this stuff. It's genuine disintegration of any notion of proper thinking and any proper notion of thought. But why is woke, which is fundamentally silly, why is it so powerful? People talk about institutional capture. It's something much more fundamental. It's got the law on its side. And what you can do, you can change the law. We can't change people's minds, but what we can do, we can change, if you like, the coercive machinery. Again, the reason that we're talking about the widening of the Overton window, one of the absolute fundamental things that's happened, and again, it's the influence of America, is the decision of Elon Musk to walk into the headquarters of Twitter with the kitchen sink and to break the political monoculture of Twitter. I know I was at the receiving end of it. When I was cancelled in 2020, it was done by a Twitter store. It's done by a particular way in which you invoke a particular online instrument. That's been broken. That's why there have been so few cancellations subsequently, because the machinery, in other words, you tackle the machine. I know I'm sounding awfully like a Trotskyite, but Trotsky was very bright. And you need to look at the law, the machines. These are susceptible of change. This is why, going back to my own historical period, Thomas Cromwell is so devastatingly effective, because he understands that ideas have to be grounded in law. Our Reformation is a law Reformation.
And we changed the law and the financial incentives, you're saying.
And financial incentives. Yeah, well, we could have a dissolution of the universities. I mean, that you have, but they are the direct heirs of the monasteries. Filled with idle, overfed people, engaged in absurd speculation. I'm sorry, isn't it true? In absurd speculation, perverting the minds of the young, usually their bodies as well. I mean, No, I think a dissolution of the universities. I could just see, let's think of one of the grand fantasies: the Great Hall of Kiel laid open and exposed to the winds, as fragments of woke tracks, rotting blow through. It would be wonderful. It'd be like Shakespeare's great sonnet, Colbert ruined choirs and whatever. Yes.
Let's take another round of questions. There's a lady at the back there.
I love the fact that was a wonderful excuse.
Gentleman here in the second row, and then Lindsay there. Again, remember the rules. Introduce yourself, quick comment, end in a question mark.
Bess Rhodes, and I'm afraid I am an academic, sorry.
I'm not going to abolish you, don't worry. Yes.
My question is, you're talking about some pretty major things being wrong in our state. Do you think that it is possible to have gradual change in the right direction? And, okay, if you have doubts about that, what do you think, as members of the Conservative Party, we should be lobbying our politicians to do? What are the top sort of 2 or 3 aims we should have as members?
Okay. Then the gentleman here again, introduce yourself, please, sir.
Ben Phillips, CIB UK. David, you've spoken in the past very powerfully against one of Blair's legacies, which was devolution north of the border and in Wales. I put it to you that any future Conservative government is going to find it very, very difficult to requisition those powers back. So how should a future government reconcile itself to the divide?
Yeah.
And there was a third question, Lindsay, wasn't it, in the front row?
Hello, I'm Lindsay Sharrett. I'm Deputy Chair Membership Shropshire and Herefordshire and CPF Chair for the Wrekin. So my question is, as you've pointed out, Mrs Thatcher wound back Attlee and Boscalism, but the sacrifice was industry. And since then, mass immigration has driven down wages, and importing from China through our free market approach has brought down wages and industry. So I'm with Disraeli. If we're not national, we're nothing. So among all the other things we're restoring, I think we need to restore industry. How can we do that and then make sure that conservatism is working for everybody, so all of our red wall voters realise that socialism and Labour is not the way to go and that we're the people who actually care about them?
Okay, so Bess asked about, is this a gradual change or is this a big bazooka on day one or week one of the new Conservative or right of centre government? Can it be done gradually? And her follow-up question was two or three big things that can be done immediately.
This is actually, I'm delighted you asked that question. We've thought about this a lot. I mean, there's whole groups of people. You can follow some of it online. There's a terrifically good, there are two online groups that it's really worth looking at. There's the Pimlico Journal that's got some outstanding stuff on it. There's also a thing run by my young friend Michael Rayner's called The Restorationist, which is a bit more way out, but very good from that point of view. It's the sort of genuinely free thought that should be going on in universities. And the conclusion we've come to is you can't do it gradually, because the structures that Blair created are self-sustaining. They're like a medieval cathedral. They've got flying buttresses. They support each other. In other words, the moment I think any attempt, for example, at repealing in isolation, at repealing the European Convention, the Act incorporating the European Convention, will immediately be ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Remember, the Supreme Court smelt blood with the whole business of, in my view, the complete outrage of ruling the prorogation of Parliament illegal. Inconceivable. It flies in the face of the Bill of Rights. It is totally against any possible reading of law, any possible reading of parliamentary history. But this is what's happened. This was the deliberate intention of that whole group of lawyers. And we need to understand that I've talked about Bingham, and we mentioned the Chagos Islands. Let me just fill you in on the connections. Bingham got probably the longest obituary, short of a monarch or a head of state, that's ever appeared in The Guardian. Who wrote it? Philip Sands, the Mauritians lawyer, the man who celebrates the victory over Britain by saying how delighted he was to have rubbed his own country's face in the mud. Those are the kind of people we're dealing with. The Attorney General is the man last year who gives the Bingham Lecture at Cambridge, in which he doubles down on the notion that that international law is a fundamental part of common law. That is purely on Bingham. It's never been discussed publicly. It's without any grounding in our legal tradition. But it's been conjured. So I'm afraid the whole lot's just got to come down.
So is there an answer to the question about pressing Conservative axis, say lobbying Kemi Badenoch to say you've really got to go for A, B and C first? Or do you have to do the whole alphabet at once?
I think you've got to say, you've got to realise that this is actually a deliberate, it's a corset, it's a terrifying straitjacket. I think many of these arguments are going to be made for us because you can see the better folk in the Labour Party realising it themselves. Mahood, or whatever she's called, who was actually clearly very intelligent. The current Home Secretary is realising much of the legal system has actually got to be changed. And in other words, you get the Blairite structure starting to turn on itself. The sudden attack on the OBR, and all of these things. There's a realising, even on the left, and do you know what? I'd be prepared to advise them. No, I'm being really serious. This is a national emergency. We used to be, we were a party that went into the Great Wartime Coalition, and there was a reason for that. We went into the Great Coalition. We led the Great Coalitions, both in the Second World War and in 29, the national government. We should be recognising this. We are entering, I think, fortunately we're not actually at war, though much of our silly posturing against Russia might very well lead us towards something like that. But we are on the eve of a kind of, I think, political breakdown, the like of which we've not experienced since the 1830s. I really do think that we're there.
Let me take.
Thank you for the question.
One last round of questions, gentlemen here. Any others?
No, can we quickly?
Oh, sorry. No, sorry. There were two. I didn't put you. Then I'll come to the gentleman here.
I can give a one-word answer on devolution. I agree with you. It's in practice impossible to undo it. Therefore, give them complete fiscal responsibility. Yeah. Abolish the Barnett formula, and I reckon within 12 months they'll come begging. A Scotsman recognises which side his pound is buttered on.
Lindsay asked about a restoration of industry.
I mean, this is the great challenge. I agree fundamentally. I think it may very well be done for us. In other words, what I think is going on now is the dissolution of the successor structure to Thatcher. In other words, AI is going to destroy that world which finds jobs for, graduates in beanology or whatever. They're all going to go. And it's a world in which more and more people will require gardeners, builders, plumbers, whatever. And I think market forces are likely. I think the whole need to reconstruct defence. So I think that rather than us all settling down and thinking, the terrible problem with state financing of industry, we know we always get it wrong. But I think that I think again, we're at the cusp of another enormous change in industrial structure. And I think it will very much go in our direction. And this is clearly the thinking that's underpinning a lot of the developments in America.
We've only got a few minutes left, but I'll try and squeeze a couple of questions in. There's a gentleman here in the white shirt. Then I'll take the gent behind there. And I think I saw one over here, the lady in the front row over here as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Will Ferguson. We say conservatism is a broad church. I don't know about everyone else in the room. I'm quite sick of this bloody church being full of heathens and heretics within our own party. What ought we do with the non-believers who are Lib Dems in blue ties?
Okay, and the gentleman behind you, if you can pass the... Sorry.
Simon Jones from North Bristol. So you've talked a lot about Disraeli and the importance of the nation. Do you think that the way that we sell this agenda to the public is that we need to embrace nationalism?
Okay. And then there's a lady on the front row here. That will be the last question.
Anne Myatt, member Wetherby and Easingwold. You talked about Thatcher and Keith Joseph. Looking at our current people in leadership positions, who do you think might become the dynamic duo later on? Is it Farage, Tice, Kemi, Stride? What's your view on that?
Okay.
So start with Will's question. A broad church, but it's a bit more like a cathedral than a broad church at the moment. It's a bit, or it hasn't got any walls sometimes, is what Robert.
No, it's much nearer to the state of Byzantium, as satirized in the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, when the rival factions in the Hippodrome tore each other apart over homoousion or homoiousion. We're at war with that, and I mean you've made this point yourself. We're the only political party in which has regularly disagreed over things like the Human Rights Act. Kemi has said for candidates, it seems to me for existing MPs and parliamentary members, if you do not recognise the logic of what I've been putting forward, you don't belong with us. It really is as simple as that. And this is going to have to happen. I'm not going to mention names, but people with a very close family connection, people maybe following my line of reasoning with Tom Bingham, are, I think, likely to depart the party. I would regret them because they're distinguished and sympathetic and intelligent, but they do not belong.
Disraeli, Simon asked about channeling Disraeli. How nationalist do we need to be, either if you like intellectually or just symbolically or performatively?
It's a very, very good point. Disraeli always talked about England. He never mentioned Britain. Britain is a new thing that comes in. The Britain, in my mind, means British Rail, weak tea, soggy sandwiches, trains that don't run on time. It was all the terrible nationalised industries were all British Leyland, you know. Britain is some sort of rusting, malfunctioning car. But being positive, and this is really very important, we cannot be conventionally nationalist so long as union remains. Because Britain, from the very beginning, we're a pre-modern state. We're not a nation state. There's no such thing as the British nation. We're English, Scots, Welsh, Irish. We've got very separate cultures. I mean, within the vanity of small difference, but they're very substantial differences. And the beauty of our old political system was right from the Union of 1707, we recognise this. The Scot Nats are the ones who deny it. England never tried to colonise Scotland. Completely the opposite. The only things that were unified, well, the Crown was already unified, the only thing that was unified in 1707 was Parliament and access to the empire and a single currency, though the Scottish banks retain separate capacity. Scotland retains its own educational system, its own legal system, its own church, its own heraldry, its own court, its own order of chivalry. And all of these things are then replicated in Ireland and eventually in Wales. So the first, for your interest, football, the first internationals are between England and Scotland. What we had, remember, and this is something we haven't mentioned and used to be of fundamental importance to conservatism, what held all this together was one thing: loyalty to the Crown. And the disappearance of the monarchy from our politics leaves this gaping hole into which things like British values, which consist of diversity and tolerance, in other words, bugger all. It was the terrible thing. We now have a doctrine of nationhood which is a flag of convenience. Anybody can fly it. It means nothing. It demands no commitment. We need to rethink. Because again, the old rule back under Disraeli was that whereas the Crown deliberately cultivates this. Holyrood is first made habitable under George V because the monarch starts going there, following on from the first visit of George IV to Scotland in 1822, the marvellous visit to Edinburgh, which is the first time a member of the royal house wears the tartan despite his girth. And there's the wonderful account of the ladies of Morningside that having alleged to say, having seen so little of his royal person hitherto, it was gracious to see so much, as admittedly it only exposed flesh-coloured tights and corsets, but there we are. But the monarchy does that. But all of that was subordinate to a general political culture which was fundamentally English. That political structure, the sense of rights, law, Parliament itself, fundamentally English. And I think we've got to reassert something like that. I mean, after all, we're letting several small tails wag a very large dog. We're 50-odd million. More.
Yeah, more.
They are, whatever, Scotland 5, Northern Ireland a couple,
yeah.
Wales, I can't quite see so small, but yeah, but they're tiny.
And then we're right on the clock, David, but the last question was, if it is going to be cometh the hour, cometh the man, who is the man or woman who is the next Thatcher?
I'm afraid I don't see one. that I don't see anybody who embodies all of those qualities, but then we didn't see them in Thatcher. I mean, that's the paradox. I see some who have some of them. I mean, the reason Farage is not there by accident, any more than Trump is there by accident. The mockery of Trump, as Mark has been indicating, is profoundly misjudged. I think that Farage has got some very remarkable qualities. I don't think being a prime minister will be one of them. Because, again, you know, what's astonishing about Thatcher in her prime, she's got those two essential things. She's got that gift of the big statement, and at the same time the command of minute detail, which is the only way you can hold the governmental machine together. I can see, for example, in somebody like Robert Chenry, the ability to do that holding together, that fierce energy, helped by Ozempic. And you know, he'll run marathons around the civil service, which is great. But has he yet got the ability to reach out? But he's getting better.
Ladies and gentlemen,
some of it's promising.
We are bang out of time. Thank you for filling up the second POP conference meeting. A reminder, do sign up or go to our website to join our newsletter list. We'd love to keep in touch. Enjoy your rest of the conference, and please join me in thanking the great Dr. David Starkey.